Rated M for mature. Sega.
Welcome to the Sega Video Podcast. I'm your host, Dino Scapatoni, and I'm with the creators and writers of Happy Tree Friends. Guys, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself before we start?
Sure. Kenn Navarro, I'm the director and creator of the show.
Kenn Pontac, writer and story editor.
Warren Graff, writer.
First off, I want to know where the inspiration for all this came from. I mean, there's always little furry happy bears and cute little animals and lots of kids' literature and even things like the Energizer Buddy that I've wanted to kill myself. So I'm wondering, is this where it came from, or do you guys have another idea of why you want to destroy and mutilate little furry creatures?
Why not?
Plus, you can't kill the Energizer Bunny. So
Yeah,
forget
keeps
that.
going and
going
going
and
and
going.
going.
He
and
does
going.
keep going.
Yeah, we tried.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you put an Energizer Bunny in one of the episodes?
No, I think we'd get sued.
Have you put a reasonable facsimile or a placeholder?
Our bunnies keep coming back after they're killed, so they kind of
technically-
are.
They do keep going.
So it came about?
Okay, so what happened was we all used to work at Mondo on other shows, and as a side kind of joke almost, we would come up with these scenarios for these crazy, just these crazy scenarios for these cute little creatures to get into, and we would basically try to make each other laugh because of it, like, hey, how about this, that kind of stuff, and literally it was a napkin drawing, like, Rody Montijo, who's my fellow co-creator, drew like a little drawing on a napkin of one of the characters, and that's kind of how it started. And later on, when we got a chance to pitch out one of our own shows, we thought, hey, this is such a crazy idea, it just might work, And the funny thing is we pitched that show to a lot of head scratching. I remember we would go, yeah, and then they would die every episode. And I remember the executives just going, kind of giving us this weird look, like, they die every episode? Like, yeah, but they come back, it's great, and it was like I always akin it to like a round peg in a square hole. Like it just never sank in. But they kind of believed in us, and we got the opportunity to do the show, which was great. And yeah, that's kind of how it started.
So there's quite a few characters. I want to know, did all these characters exist from the start, or has the roster slowly expanded? And when you come up with new characters, who comes up with them?
I think all those characters have been there.
Yeah,
the ones that we have now have been there since the beginning.
Right. There was actually more that we kind of cut out.
More.
The characters came about by. It's either we came up with a character, for example, for Handy, he's a carpenter beaver character that doesn't have any hands, and we would put him in situations where he would need his hands, that was where he was born out of, because there was we thought that would be funny, obviously. And sometimes it would come out from just the characters themselves. Like, for example, Russell was a pirate, and who doesn't love pirates? So we were like, hey, we need a pirate character. So, that's how Russell was born. So they kind of came from different places, and there was more characters that we could still. I mean, it was basically if we had stories for them, or if we had situations that we could put them in. That's what made the cut when we started the world, basically.
Some of them started off like in the beginning. There was the characters I think that got cut off were sort of ones that were sort of like one joke wonder characters that we had. We had a few of those where it was like, well, these characters are only really funny or good in this one situation. Sort of limits our possibilities. So.
Flippy is kind of a little bit like that, but
Yeah.
he's one of the most popular characters. But we have to use him judiciously, because if you put him in a story, it's a Flippy story. He's going to do this thing every time.
And he was one of the characters that in the beginning, that there was a lot of discussion back and forth about whether to keep him, because there was two camps that said, well, he's hurting other characters, or like it's funny, And so it was sort of like I remember there was a back and forth even before we did any episodes, before anything aired. Like Flippy almost didn't make the cut. He was almost trimmed out. And now he's the most popular character probably
For all
on
the wrong
show.
reasons.
Yeah, for all the wrong reasons.
Well, I was talking to you guys beforehand, and the thing with Flippy is that a lot of the deaths, or most of the deaths in the episodes, are accidental. But with Flippy, you kind of figure, well, is it accidental? Because, yeah, he's flipping out, but he's the one causing all the mayhem. And then one of you guys said, well, yeah, but it's an accidental trigger that's making him go crazy. So I guess he does fit in with the whole rest of the group.
Yeah, I mean, that was the reason that people were, arguing about it, is that here is this the one character is actually intending to harm these other characters, but the rationale is, well, he's not really knowing that he's doing it. He's kind of crazy, and it's not something that he wants to do. Plus, it allowed
I don't think
us.
that holds up in court, by the way.
In the court of cartoons, it does.
You can try that at home.
But it gave us an excuse to do some of those violent deaths that were pretty much straight on violence and action that we want to do. Because I think some of it he was born from, we were talking about John Woo movies and stuff like that. Yeah, we were talking about those kind of things. But
saw that Rambo movie, and we're like, man, this is a flippy
it's
movie.
flippy, it ripped us off. But I remember the
so
early discussions that we had talked about, like there was like a birthday party where something set him off and like he would flip up. Like there's an episode where we did this, but like one of our first discussions where like he flipped a table in slow motion, things are flying up, and there's no guns in Happy Tree Friends. But when we talked about it, he was like John Wooing, kind of devil fisting and stuff like that.
We finally got to use guns in Happy Tree Friends in the Flippy versus Flippy episode, and they were staplers.
Yeah.
But the metaphor worked perfectly, even to putting in that last clip of staples, and we got to do all those gags.
So what sort of limitations do you guys put on the episodes? I mean, you talk about not using guns specifically and having to use other things in place of guns. Is that the only real restriction you guys put on yourselves when you're writing an episode?
There's a few. There's a little, the guns. And the guns thing, I mean, just to qualify it, it's just, we just think it's too
on the
straightforward. Yeah, it's kind of too easy, There's almost no imagination to it. And, you pull out a gun and it's boom, I'm not that, like we love action movies and all that stuff, but I just think for the show, it's just too on the nose, And again, it kind of doesn't fit this weird, innocent world that they're in, It kind of doesn't belong. And it's almost more creative and funny for us to come up with other ways to do it, So, like, part of our brainstorming would be like, how can Killy,
new
character.
Yeah, it's a new character. Well, you just witnessed it.
Killy.
That's pretty much how it works.
Yeah. There you go.
That's one of those.
Let's call him Killy. And
But he never kills.
gun.
But everyone's afraid of him.
He's like huge and buff,
Yeah.
and he's totally a coward.
See, but that's exactly how stuff gets written, But how would Flippy kill somebody with a flower? Those kinds of discussions is what we do, like, because it's like it's more funnier, it's more unexpected that way. Like guns are just too straightforward, and they're just kind of.
Yeah, we try to avoid those obvious situations. I mean, there are some situations where we look back and we go, that's kind of obvious. But we try to put the characters in a situation that's not so obvious, like so we won't, like a knife plant or, something, something that's just like, well, obviously somebody's going to get hurt here. So.
And even if we introduce something like an axe, we like to do the reversed expectations where you think the character is going to cut somebody with an axe, but instead the blade flies off and now he's stuck with no axe. That was and out on a limb.
Do you guys ever get irritated at your own characters with how clueless and or stupid they can be? I'm talking about, well, so like Lumpy, for instance, or watching any Pop Cub episode where Pop puts Cub in a scalding bath of water and then goes and answers the phone and comes back and the poor Cub is, going crazy, getting burned. Do you ever, in retrospect, look back and go, my God, what is he thinking? Or is this just always just pure mirth on your guys' part?
I don't ever worry about what they've done. What gets me sometimes is when I actually see it animated. There are a couple of different things, some of the things with eyeballs, some of the actual deaths or injuries are the things that make me kind of cringe. I don't regret it, but there have been times when I've been writing a death. The one where Petunia takes a potato peeler to her arm. As I was writing that scene, I was cringing. I actually went, "Duh," and that's gold.
Yeah, and yet you still churned it out on the page, no problem.
Well, that's when we know when we've hit pay dirt. When we kind of almost go, "Whoa, that's kind of that's wrong."
Right.
And then we'll kind of slap ourselves and go, "Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for."
So, are there ever any rejected ideas that are rejected out of being too violent?
Too violent?
Not
too violent.
I remember really early on, Pop and Cub, since you brought him up, and I remember when we first started kind of coming up with with the scenarios for Cub, we kind of went, are we crossing the line? Mutilating like little...
In the first Pop and Cub one where at the end of, I don't even remember what the episode was called, when the lawnmower
Right.
Yeah, the
that one.
that one. See, we don't even know the titles, but there was a part where Cub is dead and he's laying there, and like we had Pop like get nervous and like purposely cover him up with leaves and then
Originally,
walk
that's
away.
what
Like
it
that's how it was originally written. I think it was it even animated that way?
it wasn't even
It was, but then we look back and we're like, that's kind of cold. I mean, that's a little
Lumpy
too
way to
much.
do that.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah, we might have Lumpy do it, but Pop to a child.
His own child.
Yeah, to his own child, that was cold. So we sort of made it that he was clueless and he didn't. So sometimes being stupid and clueless sort of helps us get through some of these things.
I think it helps us get through life.
Yeah.
I mean, forget the show. Just Stupid and Clueless helps us get through life.
That's right.
Well, now we know exactly where you guys are coming from. But
Give us a good radius to work in.
In terms of selecting characters for the episode, does the episode basically, once you've written it, you have a pretty good feel, all right, such and such will be absolutely appropriate for this? Or are there some episodes that are open-ended where you go, well, this really could be any one of the Happy Tree Friends. We'll take this one, and this one and maul them this time?
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah, kind of both.
Yeah.
Some characters drive the show. Flippy, Pop and Cub. You know that if you put them in there, generally they're going to be acting a certain way. Other characters are sort of the red shirts. I actually had a checklist made of drawings of all the characters, so I could keep track of the ones that died and how they died in an episode to see who was left. So you get a show with a big ensemble cast, and it's like, okay, who's left to kill? I have to keep this one alive.
We did that one time when we were doing, it was when Handy was building a house, and I think we had almost every character in the episode, and we couldn't keep track of like what was happening to each one because we had these different stories. So like every character had its own pen color as we're writing on the whiteboard to try and track, okay, because we didn't want to leave anybody out because we had this. I think we had it to a couple times where we had left somebody out. We're like, well, what about Toothy? Toothy's just walking around the house now. So
Gonna kill him.
Yeah. So, and sometimes it can get a little bit.
Can you guys take me through the process of creating a typical episode? First of all, where do you get the ideas for these gruesome deaths? And then, how much meeting of the minds is there between you guys in writing an episode? Is it a solo thing? Is it a group thing? And, maybe take me from point A to point Z, how you put these together.
Hey, let's write a new one right now.
We just did. Killy.
Killy.
That's really
The brand new character.
So we got a
revealed
character
here on
called
the
Killy.
video podcast.
So what are we gonna do with him?
He's not gonna kill.
Yeah,
That was the
Killy
whole-
does not
Killy
kill,
does
but everybody's
not
afraid
kill.
of. So when they're running away from him, they die accidentally by
Exactly.
trying to avoid him.
because he's really sensitive.
Yeah.
He's really sensitive. But yeah, that's literally how
That's
it
how
could
we
get
do it.
triggered. Like it could be, like as stupid as that, as a mispronunciation or an idea, that we have. One time I remember Kenn Pontac came in and he had this article about this guy who got stuck. While he was mountain climbing with his arm got stuck and he had to cut his own arm off. He brought that article in and just to show us just how gnarly it was. And we were like, whoa, that's crazy.
Was there a certain amount of glee when you bring this in?
Oh yeah, I was thinking that and I said, okay, here's a show, and I pitched this episode where that happens, and we started working it around, and it turned into I think one of the funnier episodes, Out on a Limb.
Out on a limb.
Yeah.
But
So-
I think like you were talking about like what do we normally do? Like I mean like when we were working on the TV show, it was like Monday morning we had like all these ideas on the whiteboard, and we would it was like either scenarios or deaths type of thing, and we like okay, well what would work best, and then like if somebody got an idea, for like a scenario, like okay, like in the circus, let's see what kind of circus deaths we can come up with, and then we'd start to kind of work into a character. Or it could be a week where we have a character and we want to start using them and like with a death for them, and we'd work them in, and then the week would be kind of like fleshing that out, and it was usually through brainstorming, and then sometimes we'd go away and like take different parts of the script and write it.
Or sometimes we'd axe whole script
Yeah.
completely because it just, it doesn't work or we can't get an ending for it, and only to revisit it months later and actually
Make it work.
Yeah,
or
come
take
up with
take sections of other scripts and kind of Frankenstein them together, and they turned out pretty good.
And we had to write a script a week.
Yeah.
So
Very
the
organized.
week kind of started out with Monday morning. It's like,
fine.
we got a whole week. What are we gonna do?
candy.
Friday's like, oh my god!
Oh yeah, and just the paranoia. If we didn't have anything by Wednesday, we knew that we were in deep trouble because we really had to start writing it on Thursday and Friday, and then it's like,
There was a lot of times where Wednesday we'd be sitting pretty, we're like, oh, we got script, this thing's almost done, and then we get to it and we'd be like, this sucks.
Yeah,
and then we'd
sometimes
start
it'd be
over.
It would be really funny one day, and then the next day you'd come back and read it and go, that's not funny anymore. I don't know what happened.
So yeah, by Friday we were sweating until we turned it in. And then it's like,
Well, sometimes it
weekend.
creeped into the weekend. We'd be like
Yeah.
emailing scripts back and forth.
Or other times we'd actually finish on a Thursday and be like, it's Friday, what are we going to do? Let's waste our lead. Let's
I
get
know.
candy on.
We have ahead of time. We could start like our Monday on Friday.
Let's let's go eat lunch early and
Hey, look,
Eat it again.
the internet.
There you go.
You know.
So how detailed are the scripts that you write? I mean, there's not a whole lot of dialogue per se in Happy Tree Friends. So when you're talking scripting, do you deliver visualized storyboards or do you let the animators handle all that stuff?
The scripts are classically written scripts. You know, they start with your opening scene, and they describe it in greater detail than most other animation scripts even. And animation scripts generally have a lot of detail. These have microscopic detail. Every vocalization that we can think of is actually slugged in. You know, Lumpy going, or some character going, ah! Everyone, because you got to take those into the booth, and somebody's got to read them. So at some point, somebody has to figure out what's being said, so we figure it out at that point.
Yeah, and that microscopic detail in the scripts is because sometimes the humor is just in those fine points. Like you have to describe something out just to get that humor just right to give it to the storyboard artist or or the animators to have it, so they can get all that stuff out.
Originally, when we first started the show, we didn't have any scripts. We would go from that idea
Scrap of paper
to,
with five lines on it.
With like, okay, here's, opens with Lumpy, walks in, and then he gets stabbed in the eye, okay, go, and then hand that to a storyboard. Usually
it was you or Rhodey,
it was me,
so
yeah.
they were in
or
on the meetings.
they're
right?
part of
Yeah.
our story or our brainstorm group, so they were there kind of, so they know, they can take notes and stuff like that. So originally we didn't even have scripts. It would just go from the room to some sort of storyboard
Big Book of Death.
or well, it come from the big book.
And that's a really good way to work because, that's sort of old school where it's done by the gag artist. You do the gags on the board and you kind of see what works. When we got into production of a series and we knew we were going to be sending the boards out and other people were going to be animating it, we knew that we had to do it like the real way.
the real.
The real,
Exactly.
the grown-up
We
way.
don't laze around
jobs.
anymore.
We had to do the big boy
Like,
animation.
man.
Well, I have got quite a few more questions for you, and we're going to break this up and do it in part 2. So that concludes.
Suspense.
Yeah, there's a lot of suspense. That concludes part 1. So thanks, guys, and we'll be right back. Make sure to check out part 2 of our Sega video podcast with the creators and writers of Happy Tree Friends.
And part 2, somebody dies.
Yeah. Kelly.
One of these guys.